We continue now at the top of Daf Daled Amud Aleph in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 4a. And the previous summit, the Gemara is dealing with the Machlokas Tanoim. What if a person declares himself a Nazir, but only identifies one of the prohibitions of Nazirus? So the Rabbanan say in such a case, the person does become a Nazir, and Rabbi Shimon says he does not become a Nazir. And the Gemara is now asking, what does Rabbi Shimon do with the pasuk of the Rabbanan, Miyayin v'Sheicher Yazir? And the Gemara says that pasuk teaches us that when you have a Nazir, so the Nazir is prohibited not only from wine of Rishus, but he's also prohibited from wine of mitzvah. And the Gemara wants to identify, what do we mean when we say wine of mitzvah? And the Gemara says, if we're talking about Kiddush and Havdalah, Hare Mushba V'Yomed Olav Me Har Sinai, when it comes to Kiddush and Havdalah, so there the person's already under oath, so to speak, from Har Sinai. The person has to drink the wine of Kiddush and Havdalah. So it can't be that the pasuk is saying that he needs to separate from that kind of wine. We will note over here that Tosfos asks, V'Yod Kasha de Kiddush Hayom Lav Doraisa. What does the Gemara even mean? Kiddush Hayom is not a Doraisa. Nami Dechsiv Zachar V'Darshinan Zachrei Al Ayayin Asmachtu. Even the pasuk of Zachar is just an Asmachta. It's not an actual source of the mitzvah on a Doraisa level. L'kach nira l'Rabbeinu Tam. So therefore Rabbeinu Tam says the Garsinan Bitmiyah. The Gersa should be as follows in the form of a Bitmiyah. V'chi Mushba V'Yomed Me Har Sinai. Is it that the person is under oath from Har Sinai when it comes to Kiddush and Havdalah? Kilomar lamali krami yusar lesser yein mitzvah. In other words, you don't need an extra pasuk to prohibit the wine of mitzvah when we're talking about Kiddush and Havdalah. V'chi mushba v'chulu. Is there a reason why we even need the pasuk? Is the person under oath from Har Sinai? The nehid Kiddush Hayom doraisa al hayayin lav doraisa. Even if you say Kiddush Hayom is doraisa, but to do it on the wine, that's not doraisa. To zochrei al hayayin asmachta. It's just an asmachta. There would be no need for the pasuk to teach us that. It's obvious. V'hashta meshani, and so then the Gemara is going to answer kagon shenishba lishtos. The case over here is he first made an oath that he was going to drink wine, then he became a nazir. V'kamash malon kro yisera dechayil alei afagav shenishba lishtos, and then we need the extra pasuk. The pasuk is saying that the nazir saschalani cannot have wine, even though before he became a nazir he had taken an oath that he was going to drink wine. That's what the Gemara now says. Ela kihodo amar Rava. Rather, what Rabbi Shimon uses the pasuk for is that which Rava said. Shavua she'eshta. A person first takes an oath that I will drink wine. V'chazer v'yamar hareini nazir. Then he goes ahead and he says, I'm going to be a nazir. Asya nazirus chayla al shvua. The nazirus comes along and it's chal on the shvua, and he has to stay away from wine. And the Gemara continues, Rabbanan nami hami boile lesser yein mitzvah ki yein rishus. Now the Rabbanan also, they need to use that same pasuk for the same thing. They need to use the pasuk to say that it's prohibited to have this wine of mitzvah when a person's a nazir, just like it's prohibited to have the wine of rishus. But the Gemara says, no, they do need it, but im kain lema kra miyayin. If that was the case, the pasuk just could have said the word miyayin. My v'shecher. Why add the word v'shecher? Shamat minotarti. That teaches us both these halachas. Again, it teaches us yein mitzvahs kin yein rishus. And it also teaches us the halach the Rabbanan, that if the person says he's going to be a nazir and identifies just one prohibition, that is enough to make the person into a full nazir. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Shimon, Hainu time in the chas of shecher. Rabbi Shimon says, no, there's a different reason why it adds the word shecher. La'alufe shecher lemikdash. It's in order to make the teaching, the comparison of shecher to the prohibitions involving the Beis HaMikdash. Because the pasuk says, Yayin v'shecher al teish ta'tov v'necho itcho. It says, you can't have yayin and shecher, and that talks about when a person is going into the Beis HaMikdash, he can't be drunk, this Kohen. And we learn as follows. We learn from Nazir. Ma'agabe Nazir, just like by Nazir, Yayin hu delitzar aval shar mashkin lo. Only yayin, only wine that intoxicates is a problem by Nazir, but other kinds of drinks that intoxicate are not a problem. Af gabe mikdash nami, so too when it comes to entering the Beis HaMikdash for a Kohen, yayin hu delitzar, it's wine that's a problem. Aval shar mashkin hamishtachrin lo, but when it comes to other drinks that intoxicate, they are not a problem. So that's what he does with the word shecher. And the Gemara continues, Ulafuka mid Rabbi Yehuda. This actually comes to exclude from the position of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanyas we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Achal develo keilis b'shasa dvash v'chola v'nichnas lemikdash. Let's say a person has these devela from keilis, that refers to these pressed figs, and he drinks wine and milk, meaning to say it intoxicates him, and he enters the Beis HaMikdash chayiv. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he's chayiv, and again, according to Rabbi Shimon, the person is not chayiv because it's not wine. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another answer. Rabbi Shimon lesle isser chal al isser. Rabbi Shimon does not hold that one isser can be chal on another isser. Rashi over here explains, hainu time of Rabbi Shimon. If you want, I could say another answer. This is the reason of Rabbi Shimon. Damar eino chay ben azirus ad sheyazur mikul. And again, going back to Rabbi Shimon on the previous summit, according to Rashi, that Rabbi Shimon on the previous summit said that a person is not chayiv in nazirus until he takes upon himself the full nazirus. If he just declares himself a nazir with regards to one prohibition, it will not take effect. Bestam Damar Hareini Nazir Rabbi Shimon L'Taime the Lesle Isser Chal al Isser. The reason is because Rabbi Shimon holds one Isser cannot be Chal on another Isser. V'achinami, that's what we say over here also. Ki Yasar Atzman and Achartzonim and Azagin. Let's say he says he prohibits himself and he only identifies that he's not going to have the grape seeds and the grape skins. V'chayla le Nazirus, and let's say that Nazirus is Chal. So lo asi idach palga de tekalachas v'tuma. The other prohibitions of shaving, when it comes to shaving, becoming tameh, those are not going to come along and be chal. V'chayli lavi, those can't be chal. That would be a problem of isser chal al isser. In other words, if a person takes upon himself a partial nazirus, so it can't be chal in two steps, so to speak, because ein isser chal al isser. Inami kiezer atzman ayayin lo asi isser tekalachas v'tuma. Similarly, let's say he says the nazirus is for wine, the other isser of shaving, and the other isser of tumah, that's not going to be chal. V'chayla isser yayin l'shavuya neder gomer. It won't be able to turn into a full neder. And the Gemara continues, the Rabbanan also, what do they do with Rabbi Shimon's pasuk, which was Mikol Asher Yosem Migefen Hayayin? Amri Loch Rabbanan, the Rabbanan will say to you, they'll use the pasuk for the following. Hasam Lime, there it's teaching us Alisure Nazir, Shemitztarfim Zem Zeh, that when it comes to the prohibitions of Nazirus, they can join together to create the shear of Kazayas. Let's say a person has a little bit Chartzanim, a little bit Zogim, so they can join together to create the Kazayas, which creates the violation of the Isser. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Shimon less late tziruf, but Rabbi Shimon doesn't need to use the pasuk for that, because he doesn't hold of tziruf when it comes to Nazirus. The Tanya, because we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Shimon says, Kol shuhu lamakos, when it comes to Nazirus, even the smallest amount, you don't need a kazayas. Even the smallest amount is going to get you lashes. Lo amru kazayas elul inyan carbon. The shear of kazayas is only stated with regards to carbon. And Rashi over here explains, the Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol shu lamalkus, it's even the smallest amount to get lashes. Lo amru shir achila lekazayas elin in carbon. When it comes to eating something that's prohibited, the idea that it has to be a kazayas is only relevant to karbonos. And Rashi points out, in Shari Isurim, that only is relevant to other Isurim, not Nazirus. Shechayavin al shegegaso chatos, by other Isurim, where there's a chiv to bring a chatos if you do b'shogeg, kegon chaylev v'dam v'chometz b'pesach, like chaylev and dam and chometz on Pesach, those things, so there's a chiv carbon, so there we talk about kazayas. Afal gabe nazir, but when it comes to nazir, kiyavar al nazirus of yachal zog o chartzen the milko delaki. There, if a person transgresses and eats the part of the grape, so it's malchus. V'lo have a chayiv carbon b'cholshu. You're not going to be a chayiv a carbon. So b'cholshu mechayiv again, it's just a kolshu. V'lo ba'inan beitzir. If there's no need to join together because there is no requirement of a kazayas. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hareini Keshimshon, if a person says, I'm going to be like Shimshon, or Keben Manoach, like the son of Manoach, Kebal Dalila, like the husband of Dalila, Kamisha Akar Dal Sosaza, like the one that uprooted the doors of Azza, Kamisha Nakru Plishtim Esenov, like the one whose eyes were pierced by the Plishtim, Harezen Nazir Shimshon. All of those declarations make a person a Nazir Shimshon. And the Gemara says, Lamali lemisna kol halin. Why do we have to teach all of these different languages? Why do we have to say all of these different phrases? And the Gemara says, Strichi, it's needed. The Yomar Hareini Keshimshon, because let's say a person says, I am like Shimshon. Havamina Shimshon Achrina, I might think it's a different Shimshon. Kamash Malon Keben Manoach, that's why it says Keben Manoach. Vitona Keben Manoach, and if it said Keben Manoach, Havamina Ikud de Miskri Hachi, I might think there are those who are called Ben Manoach. Maybe it's not a reference to the Nazirus of Shimshon. And that's why Kamash Malon Kebal Dalila, Uchamisha Nakru Plishtem Eseinav. That's why the Mishnah says Kebal Dalila, Kamisha Nakru Plishtem Eseinav. Those phrases, those are the ones that clearly identify that we're talking about Shimshon. Those phrases on their own could identify Shimshon, but the earlier phrases in the Mishnah on their own would not be sufficient. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ma bein Nazir Olam le-Nazir Shimshon. What's the difference between someone who is a Nazir forever, a permanent Nazir, and a Nazir Shimshon? Nazir Olam hich b'tzar o mekel b'tar. When it comes to a Nazir Olam, so if his hair becomes heavy, he can lighten it using a razor, he can cut it a little. Umevi shalosh behemos, and then he has to bring 3 animals as a carbon, just like anybody whose term of Nazirus has ended. V'im nitman, if he becomes tamei, mevi carbon tuma, he has to bring a carbon tuma. That's all true by a Nazir Olam. But Nazir Shimshon, when it comes to a Nazir Shimshon, hich b'tzaro eino mekel, if his hair becomes heavy, he cannot lighten it. V'im nitman, if he becomes tamei, eino mevi carbon tuma. He doesn't bring this carbon tuma. And the Gemara says, Nazir Olam man dekar shmei. Whoever mentioned anything about a Nazir Olam, suddenly this Mishnah starts talking, Ma bein Nazir Olam le Nazir Shimshon. We never mentioned the concept of a Nazir Olam. And the Gemara says, Chisuri michsar v'hachi katani. There are words missing in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah should be read as follows. Ha'omer hareini Nazir Olam. If a person says, I am a Nazir Olam, harei zeh Nazir, so then he will become a Nazir. And ma'abei Nazir Olam la Nazir Shimshon. What's the difference between a Nazir Olam and a Nazir Shimshon? Nazir Olam hech b'tzaro mekel b'tar. Again, a Nazir Olam, a permanent Nazir. If his hair is heavy, he lightens it with a razor. Or maybe shalosh behemas, and he brings 3 animals. V'im nitma, maybe carbon tumma, and if he becomes tumma, he brings a carbon tumma. Nazir Shimshon, when it comes to a Nazir Shimshon, hech b'tzaro eino mekel b'tar. If his hair becomes heavy, he does not lighten it with a razor. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Dalid Amud Beis.